It is exactly 12:37, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the program Kim Heller. She's the author of a book called No White Lies, Black Politics and White Power in South Africa. Kim, good afternoon. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Julie. It's a privilege to be on your show. Thank you so much for the invitation.
My pleasure entirely. I haven't read the book. The title kind of punches you in the gut. You call yourself a self-declared white settler, and you also in the book talk about white supremacy. We're going to talk about how you compiled the book, but I've also looked at the book review by David Letwalo. He is an activist and a law academic. I'm sure you've read that review. What do you think about it?
What do I think about the review?
Yes.
Yes, I think it was a lovely review. And actually what I quite like about it is that in parts he's quite complimentary, and in parts he points out things that he doesn't like. Yes, and
yes.
But I think that's fantastic. And I welcome constructive criticism. I love it, actually. And in fact, I've published his review on my own platforms, because he raises critical thinking points. And I think that's often what's missing in our society is reasonable debate. We so readily label people and direct insults at people. So when I'm attacked by critical academic thought and ideological thought, I welcome that. And in fact, it started a very nice debate on some platforms.
Wow. Okay, is this your first book?
Yes, it is, actually. And the book is a compilation of 36 of my newspaper columns that have appeared in various newspapers over the last 3 years. And it's almost a prelude or preface to a book that I'm working on, which is on white power in South Africa, because this phenomenon of white power, even in a democratic so-called Black South Africa, is something that I think we've had little coverage on. And I described it. I was actually on an American talk show 2 nights ago, and I spoke about this as the real pandemic in our society, more so than something like COVID, because white power and white supremacy actually creates deep poverty for Black people still in a democratic South Africa, and actually claims more Black lives than a pandemic like COVID.
Absolutely. When we talk white supremacy in South Africa, and that seems to be an issue close to your heart, here you are, a white woman talking about these issues in South Africa, a white woman talking about scathing Black issues, talking about just how it's tearing the nation apart, because you also talk about land reform in the book. You also talk about 27 years into democracy, but you have a very small Black elite who are the greedy Black elite. They're holding on to all of the power, and you have the masses. If anything, their situation might be even worse, far worse than it was under the dark days of apartheid.
Well, I think my book speaks to the lie of the Rainbow Nation. And I think that we were sold a dream that didn't happen. So I use quite emotional language. I speak about reconciliation as being a white man's medicine that has done more to harm than to heal. So what happened in 1994 was that Black people were simply reconciled with their poverty and white people with their privilege. And I speak about privilege, almost getting an extra license to operate in the new South Africa. But I wouldn't say the condition of Black people is worse than it was under apartheid. I think in some ways the ANC has restored the dignity of Black people. So I would never want to make that comparison. But the ANC government, they have failed deeply because they haven't put Black people first. What comes first is white profit. And I can give you many examples of that. It's not just my opinion. We see in Marikana, the government had a choice to support white profit or their own people, a living wage for their own people, and they chose white profit. So I'm aghast. I used to be, I describe myself in the book as a devotee of the ANC. But I've come to the realization that the ANC is serving white interests, not the interests of the ordinary black person.
So when you say that, I immediately think EFF, but then you also joined the EFF and became disillusioned with them. What was the reasons for that disillusionment? And then I want to come back to Marikana and ask the question, how would you have seen that issue play out differently? In terms of government having failed the people of Marikana, the massacre that happened there, what could they have done to have repaired that situation? So a whole host of questions thrown at you.
Well, thank you. And I think they're all very related, because it was at the point when Marikana happened that I reviewed my political allegiances. And at that time, a former student at Wits University, Advocate Dalim Pofo, who I was with at Wits University, he said a statement, and I thought it was very profound. He said, the ANC left me, I didn't leave the ANC. And he had joined the EFF. So for the first time, I saw a possible alternative to the ANC in the form of the EFF. But just looking at Marikana, it's not like these miners were asking for something unrealistic. They were asking for a living wage.
Absolutely.
And they were mowed down for that. And that's a great tragedy. And the tragedy today is that there's been no recompensation for the widows. We have a president who has yet to go and kneel down in front of those widows and apologize for what happened. And I think what I found, first of all, the needless death of so many people, including the policemen, we mustn't forget about them, their lives were lost. But the arrogance of the ANC government in never saying, we are sorry, for taking accountability for the loss of lives. So I speak in one of my chapters about the lack of accountability of the ANC, that they are so far away from their own people. And I think this is one of the most damning things that can be said. There's a social distancing, almost an increasing social distancing between the ANC politicians and ordinary black people. And that's a great shame. I speak as well of being very honored to be a very junior member of a team for the ANC in 1994, when we looked at election polling and the needs of the people. And at that time, working with Madiba, there was such a concern, a genuine concern about what the people wanted and how the ANC could serve the people best. But that has dwindled out, and almost absolutely. I think possibly so I became very disillusioned with the ANC. To jump to the EFF, I joined the EFF, and it was an extraordinary experience. I worked with the most committed activists I've ever worked with, and I have high regard for them. And Julius Malema, despite all the characterization of him, he's actually a highly intelligent man, and I enjoyed working with him. I was aghast when the EFF gifted their votes to the DA, because I was working at polling stations overnight. We were trying to get votes, working really hard. And then before we knew it, our votes were given to a party that is a bastion of white power.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
All right. Do you think it's too late for reparation as far as the people of Marikana is concerned? Do you think that if the ANC government showed some remorse and, as you say, bow down in front of them and try and fix how horribly, incorrectly, and how they've wronged the people of Marikana, that it might still make people gain confidence in the ANC?
Well, I think it's late, but I think it should still be done. And, the whole issue of reparations needs to go beyond Marikana. I speak in my book about
Absolutely.
white people who never offered reparations. So, that needs to be focused on. But I think that the people of Marikana would be willing to listen. And they haven't shown a reluctance. In fact, strangely enough, last night I was called by somebody from the Marikana community, ordering my book. ordering my book for the library, which is probably the greatest honor I could get. And, speaking about the unchanging conditions, the unchanging social conditions in that community. So, if there's ever forgotten people, it's those people in Marikana, and they have been treated extremely badly. So the issue of reparations and forgiveness needs to be done not only for that, but right through to white people who have never accounted for the deep acts of inhumanity against their fellow Black South Africans.
Here you are, a white woman speaking up for the Black man, speaking up for the gross injustices that you see playing out around you. 27 years later, you also believe that the transformation is not as it should be. Perhaps more needs to be done. What is the more that needs to be done? What is the position of the white man in South Africa today? We know that the chicken run has happened ages ago. So all the brains and all the money is gone. The white man's money and his brains are out of the country. What is that telling us about the remainder of the whites, those that chose to be in the country, those that chose to remain on in South Africa?
Let me maybe just take one step back. One of the things, and it's raised by David Leswalu, he speaks about, I'm entering a difficult terrain in this book because I'm saying things, and I must be careful that I'm not being seen to speak on behalf of anyone else. So let me just maybe put that to rest. I make it very clear in my book that I write as a white woman with ill-gotten privilege, as a child of privilege, like every single South African, not only present but past and future. So I'm very clear that I don't speak for Black people or represent Black people, or I don't even speak to Black people. I'm trying to just unearth some truths, very uncomfortable truths, particularly for white people, and to try and change that consciousness. But I don't know that that's even possible, because white people have had marathon opportunity to repent, to show some kind of accountability for the gross acts of inhumanity, and they haven't. So I think white people stay in this country, they now define themselves as Africans. And I say in my book, there's no such thing as a white African. It's very convenient now for white people to say, I'm African, after generations of saying, I'm white and European, and I use European facilities. And whilst my Black fellow South Africans can't even sit on the same bench as me. So I think white people continue to act in this country as if it's their nation, but it's not. And I would like to see wholesale reparations from white people, whether it's a wealth tax, an apartheid tax. And I'm working on that with actually some Americans who have done very well in ensuring reparations of the local communities there. And I'm hoping that we are able to raise the consciousness of white people, but I'm not optimistic, because when I write this book, I get attacked and say, you don't speak for me. I'm not privileged. I've worked hard for what I have. So white people think they're in this position in society through to hard work, but it's not. It's ill-gotten privilege and power on the backs and pain of their fellow Black South Africans.
Your thoughts on land reform? There are a lot of people who believe that it's taking forever as far as land reform is concerned. On the other hand, there's the white farmers or white landowners who've had this land for generations, in their family. They can go back hundreds of years to say that my great-grandfather or my ancestors worked the land and created something out of nothing. How do you respond to all of that? And is EFF the answer as far as land reform is concerned?
Well, I think we need to understand that land in this country is more than just an economic imperative issue. I mean, the issue of land return and land justice is economic, but it's also moral. Land was stolen. So most of that land was gotten in a very violent way. Families were burnt, they were forced off land. Their lives were fractured, and white people on the whole seized land in a very brutal way. So we have to look at justice. People cannot be economically sustainable if they don't have land. And the interesting thing is that if you study history, you will see that when land was taken, most of the black people using land were very successful, either in subsistence farming or even making a small profit. So we have this myth that black people can't farm. But the issue is land was taken, and I believe it should be returned. I think I don't know why there's this myth that black people can't farm, or even if they can't, this is their land. It belongs to them. Maybe we shouldn't set conditions on what they do with their land. And the EFF, in fact, I think EFF has strayed a little bit from their land position. They're now speaking about taking certain tracts of land, where before they were speaking about all land. My prediction on land is that we have an ANC government who's too timid and terrified of white people to ever take land back. So I think we're going to see state land being returned, unoccupied, possibly unfertile land being returned. And that to me is not the answer. So my stance on land is radical. I think it needs to be done. And both, I said, as a moral imperative as well as an economic imperative. People often compare the situation to Zimbabwe, and I think that's completely incorrect. The land issue in Zimbabwe failed largely because of deep sanctions that rendered that economy impotent. So when people raise those arguments, I find them problematic.
Okay, and I digress here, and I'm not sure if you've contained this in your book, but I'm thinking about minority communities, specifically the colored community in the Western Cape. And a very, very sore point with them is the District 6 issue. Have you looked at that? Have you given that any thought? And why has there been such a dragging of heels on that issue as well?
Yeah, I think that's a real concern. And I think that there's certainly minority communities like that who are getting less attention from the government. And I think it's a persistent issue. And what we see is that the lack of government attention is resulting in quite explosive situations. And I think that the loss of life and the tearing apart of communities is going to continue. But we're seeing that the ANC government, and in fact government in general, even in the Western Cape, paying scant attention to minority groups. And I think that that's regrettable, because there's not a solution-seeking approach. It's as if let's ignore this and it goes away, or pay some celebrity picture opportunities without understanding the root problem and the real needs of these particular groups.
Okay, time is running out. I've got less than 5 minutes to wrap up. You speak glowingly about Mama Winnie Mandela, Madikizela Mandela, in your book. And yet, after the Stompie Sepe scandal, the murder of Stompie Sepe, she was not very revered, or not as revered as the majority of South Africans, believed, or the rest of the world believed her to be. Your thoughts? And you, like I said, speak of her glowingly in the book. Do you think that was unfair for the media and other parties to have attacked her the way they did, in terms of the Stompie and other such sagas?
I think, first of all, no one is above the law. So, for instance, we have the controversy of a former president now not wanting to go to, account for perhaps transgressions. And I believe everyone must be treated equally before the law, including Winnie Mandela, President Jacob Zuma, Cyril Ramaphosa. As far as I know, the Stompie case was thrown out of court, and his mom actually said that Winnie Mandela was set up. I do believe that the issue was that the media was villainizing her, as they choose to do certain people in this country, so that there was a brutal media attack against her. And in the end, from my reading of the media reports, and the final legal outcome was that she was not guilty of that crime.
Mm-hmm.
And
though there are certain quarters who believe that Stompie's mother's silence was paid for by Winnie's, Winnie's supporters, so to speak. Oh, I thought I'd lost you.
Well, perhaps, I think in this country you wonder, you'll never hear the truth on certain things. I think I revere her as a leader that was born out of the people. I think she stood up for things. She was villainized by the media. And I think that's one of the things that I focus a lot on my book about, the media bias. So, I mean, we have a president at the moment that the media is glorifying, yet this is a man who's stealing the truth because he doesn't want us to know who funded his campaign. So I think we need to look at every politician with scrutiny and with honesty, even if they happen to be our favorites, and say, not in my name can these people do these things. And yes, I mean, I've taken a particular perspective on Winnie Mandela, and I do believe she was vindicated. But in this country where truth doesn't often reign, I think we may never know what really happened.
Okay, I have so many more questions for you. Hopefully talk to you again sometime soon. But just in closing, your thoughts on state capture. Has that truly done us as South Africans a lot of harm? Can we recover from this? Is there a possibility, a remote possibility, that we might be able to hold the necessary parties to account, including Jacob Zuma? Will we be able to recoup the money that was stolen from you and I, the taxpayers of South Africa?
Mm-hmm. State capture, I think when I write the one article, and I write it with Professor Sipho Siepe, we wrote quite a lot about the Zondo Commission. I think we describe that as terrorism, state capture, but we need to define what state capture is. And what we've seen coming out of the Zondo Commission doesn't give us much about state capture. It was very limited in its scope. And, Brian Molefe presented some damning evidence that there's been such a concern about a 4% apparent state capture hold of Tegeta, 4% of Eskom contracts, but 96% of contracts held by white people over Eskom has never been interrogated.
Right.
So I think I said in one of my interviews this week that it's almost like a black and black violence chamber, state capture, because there seems to be a determination to say black people are corrupt. But vulgar state capture by white companies, particularly at Eskom and other state-owned enterprises, we don't want to talk about that. And I think it's a very worrying phenomenon.
A very refreshing and different point of view makes me start rethinking my status quo, undoubtedly. Love to chat to you some more, but we have run out of time. Hopefully get you on the show again sometime soon. Go well and have a great day. Thank you indeed for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
That was Kim Heller talking about her book. You've heard all her thoughts on, as a white woman, about the shenanigans in South Africa and the fact that white people are still being protected and are still the kingpins in industry, so to speak. Time for me to wrap up. Thank you indeed for your company. I sincerely hope you've enjoyed the show as much as I've enjoyed your company. As always, please